So, I watched Blade Runner 2049, and it is one of the best movies I've watched in a while. Now, let me prefix this by saying, I'm a pretty big fan of the original Blade Runner, so take my opinion on 2049 with a grain of salt. Ever since I first discovered Blade Runner around the ripe age of 13, I was immediately intrigued. The sci-fi environment, the amazing score, and Han Solo himself playing the lead role. Granted, I knew nothing about the plot, so I was hesitant in viewing it, and so I never did. 2049 came to theaters, and I still hadn't watched the original. And because of that fact, I decided not to go to the theaters to watch 2049. I was very interested in watching it, and I really wanted to, but I felt like Blade Runner was just that kind of series that you really needed to watch in order to fully appreciate and understand the world. So I never went to watch 2049 when it came and went to theaters. It wasn't until last year, in 2020, during the pandemic, I finally got the time to sit down and watch the original Blade Runner. And it immediately became one of my favorite films of all time. For the same reasons I listed before, but also because of the amazing acting and a very investing and existential story. Roy was one of the most compelling and fascinating characters in all of cinema. All of that being said, Blade Runner was not a flawless movie. At times its pacing was a bit slow. The Deckard detective scene is always presented as the prime example of this movie's slow pacing.
Enhanced 224 to 176. Enhance. Stop.
Which also leads to another issue, that Deckard in that movie, for being a detective, does surprisingly very little detective work in the film. That scene is pretty much the only scene where he actually does detective work. Also, although the film presents a very fascinating moral dilemma, that being what makes a human and what does it mean to be human, I feel it never really delved too deep into it. It never really took risks with that story. Blade Runner kept its narrative pretty simple and easy to follow. The only real ambiguity in the film was if Deckard himself was a replicant, which, spoilers, he isn't because he shows up in 2049. I mean, it's not really a spoiler, considering how they literally put him in the trailers for the movie of 2049, so it seems like even the studio doesn't care about spoilers at this point. One last thing I didn't really like about the original Blade Runner was the romance between Deckard and Sean Young's character of Rachel. It felt odd. Not like out of left field odd, but kind of like forced odd. It didn't feel natural. But that's a bit of a nitpick, it's not entirely detrimental to the plot. I just wish that they handled it a bit better. Overall, I still adore that film, and would gladly give it a 9.1 out of 10. But enough of the original Blade Runner, this video is about 2049, so let's talk about my feelings regarding this film. Blade Runner 2049 pretty much took everything that I loved from the original and expanded upon it, while also improving on the things I didn't really enjoy from the original. The original Blade Runner took place entirely within future Los Angeles, and although the setting was amazing, it lacked diversity. The entire film had similar looking sets and environments, naturally for that very reason. Meanwhile, in 2049, they have the protagonist, being Ryan Gosling's character of Detective KD6-3.7, or K for short, travel all around LA, inside and out, doing actual detective work, allowing for all sorts of unique environments. A few good examples would be the junkyard, and the hazy desert where Deckard is found later in the film. 2049 also did an incredibly good job of carrying over the somewhat retro future aesthetic of the original Blade Runner. Like most media from the 80s and earlier, Blade Runner has a rather aged vision of the future. Most screens are pretty low res, a 4:3 aspect ratio, Vehicles look vaguely like DeLoreans with their gull-winged doors, and although they fly, they still have wheels, as well as can be driven as cars. And even in the opening shot of the original, many power plants are spewing fumes into the air. And 2049 also has that feel to its technology. Advertisements are placed to now obsolete companies such as Atari and Pan Am. In one scene, Kay seems to be looking through what seems like a microfiche. Oh, and child labor. Yay! Fun! All of these realistic parallels really help ground the world in realism, making it easier to feel invested into the world and its story. But above all else, really helps keep 2049 grounded within the same universe or world as the original film. Several sequels suffer from what I like to call a world-building identity crisis. I touched on the subject in the solo video. As a matter of fact, that brief solo video was entirely about the subject. But when films change too much from a world that people are already comfortable with, it feels incredibly disconnected, almost as if they aren't even set in the same world. A few examples of this would be the Alien prequels, with their xenomorphs, or lack thereof, actually, and to some extent, BioShock Infinite, and changing the setting entirely from the underwater city of Rapture in the first two games to the divine world of Columbia. There's that really stark contrast in setting and environment and world building to the point where it just feels completely different and set in completely different worlds and stories. Similarly to the first, Blade Runner 2049 also suffers a bit of pacing chugginess in parts. I never actually found myself bored during this film. I was always invested in what was going on screen. 2049's action is well spaced out, it's brief, and has purpose in the plot. It's never really just there to make a scene more exciting or spice it up, you know. The action is always there because it needs to be there. And this also applies to its dramatic beats. The film will present a heavy or serious drama scene, and follow it up with long establishing shots or dialogue-free sequences to give the audience some time to breathe and reflect on what just transpired. The story as well takes the whole moral dilemma from the first film and expands upon it. In the original Blade Runner, replicants had a slight glow in their eyes, similarly to how Kat's eyes look reflective in the dark. It was a plot device to let audiences know definitively who was a replicant and who wasn't. In 2049, that glow is noticeably absent, and that is entirely intentional, I'm pretty sure. The main plot of 2049 really wouldn't work if they brought that back, since the plot plays a lot more with that blurry line between humans and replicants, and I think it works beautifully. My point is that the reflective eyes played a very big role in the original film. Meanwhile, the lack of those reflective eyes in 2049 plays a completely different role, but just as effective in the first film. Really, the more I think about it, the more I realize I have nothing really serious or genuinely to criticize about Blade Runner 2049. I mean, I have nitpicks. Like, the big nitpick would be like, I felt like the nudity was a bit excessive. The nudity was fine in some scenes, so long as it fit in the context of the plot. For example, the tank replicants and the newly born replicant scene. But there were a few instances in this film where I felt like the nudity was just a bit gratuitous and unnecessary. For example, the brothel that had like unusually transparent and not very soundproof walls, and it was just like mere feet away from what seemed like a food court. Plus, the giant Naked Joy hologram was just kind of like out there in the Central Plaza, like in the public. How am I supposed to take my synthetic kids to the synthetic park without little Bobby over here falling behind because he keeps getting distracted by the huge pink hollow butt crack in the sky?
He goes, Queen of Valhalla, sit on my face!
Again, these scenes, they don't take away from the plot, But the thing is, they also don't add to the plot, so I really don't see why we need them. But one last thing that I wanted to talk about with Blade Runner is its characters. Blade Runner stories tend to be a bit small scale. It's never really a big story. It's not like Avengers Endgame levels of ambitious. And so for that reason, its cast is typically pretty small and concise. And because of that small cast, they need to really apply themselves and make sure that these characters are very well written and investing. 2049 has a lot of good characters, when the original has a few great characters, when the rest were completely forgettable. So 2049 does a much better job than the original at finding that balance across all characters. Blade Runner has quickly become one of my all-time favorite IPs out there. It pretty much checks all of my boxes for what I like. It has an amazing score, like I said, beautiful world, compelling and intricate characters, and gorgeous cinematography. Blade Runner 2049 is a very rare case where it enhances the original film. And so I have to give Blade Runner 9.5 out of 10. And done. Now, with that out of the way, I really have to get going. I've got some lost time to make up for. I watched Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049. I gotta go now and watch the other 2047 films in this franchise. So, I'll see you guys in a few months. What a stupid business decision.